Picture this. 6 a.m., Sunday, suburban Florida, sun barely up. I step outside, barefoot, heart pounding. My Jeep Wrangler, vanished. Shattered lock bits crunch under my feet. Diesel fumes linger where my ride once sat. A snarky HOA notice flaps on my mailbox. Commercial vehicle violation towed per section 12.4. Classic Karen move from Brenda Hutchfield, our HOA's clipboard tyrant, clutching her rulebook like a dictator. Big mistake, Brenda. I'm Detective Marcus Delacroix, and that commercial vehicle? An undercover police rig loaded with surveillance gear that caught her every move. Chain cut, tow truck called the works. Her power trip? Felony theft, taped, gift wrapped for the precinct. Her face when the sirens rolled up, lights flashing, and she tried to argue? Absolute gold. What would you do if a Karen stole your ride? Drop your worst HOA horror story below. Where you watching from? Let me back up and tell you how this whole nightmare started. 8 months ago, my world imploded. 15 years as a detective specializing in financial crimes, and I couldn't see my own marriage crashing until the divorce papers landed on my kitchen table like a subpoena from hell. Sarah got the house in Tampa, the good schools, the stable neighborhood. I got every other weekend with my 14-year-old daughter Zoe, and a pile of legal bills that could choke a horse. The bitter taste of my lawyer's stale coffee still haunts my nightmares. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid place to build from. I found this little ranch house in Maplewood Heights, suburban Florida, perfect for a fresh start. Close enough for Zoe's visits, handicap accessible for my mom, and affordable on a cop's salary after divorce lawyers picked my bones cleaner than vultures at roadkill. My mother Dolores moved in after her hip surgery, 72 years old, diabetic, stubborn as a mule, but the sweetest woman who ever lived. I installed a wheelchair ramp myself. Took 3 weekends and enough curse words to make a sailor request shore leave. The smell of fresh lumber and my own sweat became the scent of hope rebuilding. The Jeep Wrangler? That's our project. Department vehicle during the week. Father-daughter restoration dream on weekends. Zoe loves getting her hands dirty, learning about engines, talking about everything except why mommy and daddy don't live together anymore. The sound of her laughter while we work drowns out everything else wrong in my world. Now, about our neighborhood's self-appointed queen bee. Brenda Hutchfield, 48, real estate agent, married to Dr. Kenneth the dentist. They live in the biggest house on the block. You know the type. Lawn so perfect it looks like AstroTurf because she probably measures each blade with a ruler. Brenda's been HOA president for 6 years running. Not because she's popular, but because running against her is like volunteering for a root canal without anesthesia. She times people's garbage placement, measures grass height, and once called code enforcement because Mrs. Eliana's garden gnome was compromising neighborhood aesthetics. But here's what nobody knew. Brenda was drowning. Her real estate business was tanking harder than crypto in a bear market. Kenneth was playing dentist with his hygienist after hours, and Brenda's mother's dementia was burning through their savings like a house fire. The HOA was the only kingdom where Queen Brenda still wielded her plastic scepter. The first violation notice appeared like a ransom demand. Commercial vehicle storage prohibited per HOA guidelines. I knocked on her door, police training kicking in, stay calm, be respectful, find common ground. Ma'am, I understand your concern, but this is my personal vehicle that I happen to use for work. Brenda's eyes narrowed like a cat spotting a wounded bird. Rules apply to everyone, detective, especially police officers who should know better. The way she spat police officers made it sound like I sold drugs to kindergartners. Mrs. Eliana was watering her flowers nearby, pretending not to eavesdrop while Colonel Pete Brennan washed his car and muttered something about power-hungry civilians. That night, Zoe asked why the lady across the street was photographing our house. The metallic taste of pure rage flooded my mouth as I watched Brenda through the window, documenting every angle like she was building a federal case. Anonymous complaints started flowing to my department about suspicious late-night activities. Swing shifts meant 2 a.m. arrivals sometimes, but Brenda painted it like I was running a criminal enterprise. She researched my divorce online, found every humiliating detail, then questioned my moral fitness for family neighborhoods. The discrimination was surgical, never overtly racist or anti-cop, just enough innuendo to plant doubt. What kind of criminals does he arrest? Should our children feel safe around such influences? My mother started hiding when Brenda's heels clicked past on her inspection rounds. That sound became our early warning system, like hearing rattlesnakes in tall grass. I should have seen it coming. Financial crimes detective, remember? I knew how bullies operated, how they tested boundaries before the real attack. I just never expected war to be declared over a parking space. 2 weeks after that first violation notice, Brenda launched her full-scale assault. City code enforcement showed up at my door Tuesday morning while I was getting Mom her insulin injection. The inspector looked embarrassed as he explained someone reported an illegal auto repair business operating from my garage. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, leading him to the garage where Zoe and I kept basic tools. The smell of motor oil and teenage dreams filled the space. Hardly a commercial operation unless you count father-daughter bonding as a felony. The inspector was Jake Morrison, my old partner from 10 years back. He took one look around and shook his head. "Marcus, someone's really pushing this. Filed 3 separate complaints in 2 days." "What kind of complaints?" "Excessive noise during weekend hours, unauthorized business operations, and this one's creative. Potential environmental hazards from fluid disposal." Jake handed me the paperwork. "You know this is garbage, right?" That weekend, Zoe arrived for our regular father-daughter time, excited to install new speakers in the Jeep. We'd been working maybe 20 minutes when Mrs. Eliana appeared at my garage door, looking nervous as a church mouse at a cat convention. "Detective Marcus, that woman is back with her camera," she whispered in accented English, "taking pictures of you and your daughter working." I stepped outside and sure enough, there was Brenda across the street. Telephoto lens clicking away like she was paparazzi catching celebrities in compromising positions. The metallic click, click, click made my skin crawl. Same sound as handcuffs closing, but somehow more menacing. "Dad, why is she doing that?" Zoe asked, grease smudged on her cheek like war paint. That's when something snapped inside me. My daughter shouldn't have to ask why an adult was stalking her. The bitter taste of protective fury flooded my mouth as I pulled out my phone and started documenting right back. That night, after Zoe fell asleep, I dove into research mode. 15 years investigating financial crimes teaches you to follow paper trails, and HOA bylaws are just another type of evidence. I remembered a case where a property management company got nailed for selective enforcement. They couldn't cite some residents while ignoring identical violations from others. 3 hours of digging through meeting minutes, and jackpot. Brenda had approved her friend Sandra's landscaping truck parked identically to my Jeep. Same size, same commercial appearance, 0 violations. I photographed that truck from every angle, time-stamped everything. In court, this kind of selective rule application proves discriminatory intent faster than DNA evidence. Monday morning brought Brenda's next escalation, an organized petition claiming I created security concerns for the neighborhood. She was going door to door like a political candidate, clipboard in hand, vanilla perfume announcing her presence 3 houses away like an olfactory early warning system. Mrs. Eliana refused to sign and called me immediately. She says you arrest dangerous people, bring criminals to our neighborhood. I tell her you help me with grocery bags. Very polite young man. Colonel Pete Brennan didn't just refuse, he threw her off his property. Lady, I served with cops in Afghanistan. That man has more honor in his pinky than you've got in your whole body. Apparently he also told her that her flower garden looked like something that died and came back wrong, which made me snort coffee through my nose when Mrs. Eliana reported it. But Dave and Sierra, the young couple 3 houses down, signed. They admitted later Brenda implied their home business permit might face additional scrutiny if they didn't cooperate. Classic intimidation tactics I'd seen mob enforcers use, just with more suburbia and less broken kneecaps. The smell of Brenda's obsessive lawn fertilizer started making me nauseous. Chemical green perfection that reeked of control and desperation. She was outside constantly now, always watching, always documenting, measuring grass heights with an actual ruler like some suburban drill sergeant conducting lawn inspections. Then came the masterstroke of pettiness. Brenda scheduled an emergency HOA meeting about maintaining community standards and family values. The agenda specifically mentioned inappropriate activities and moral character concerns. I attended that meeting, notepad ready, police training engaged. 17 residents crowded into Brenda's living room, which reeked of vanilla candles and barely contained rage. She'd prepared a PowerPoint presentation about my suspicious behavior patterns. "Late-night arrivals," she announced, clicking to a slide with photos of my driveway. "Unusual vehicle modifications, association with undesirable elements through his profession." The way she paused before profession made it sound like I sold meth to school children. Mrs. Eliana stood up, all 4'10" of righteous fury. "This is America. Man works honest job, takes care of family, helps neighbors. You should be ashamed." Colonel Brennan nodded grimly. Ma'am, I've seen actual security threats in 3 war zones. This ain't one of them. Then Jake called with something that made my detective instincts tingle. All those code enforcement complaints? Filed from the same computer IP address, Brenda's home office. She'd been submitting multiple false reports under different names, creating fake evidence to justify harassment. That night, tucking Zoe into bed, she asked the question that lit a fire in my soul. Dad, maybe I shouldn't visit so much. I don't want to cause problems. Nobody makes my daughter feel unwelcome. Game on, Brenda. Brenda's next move proved she'd graduated from petty harassment to full psychological warfare. Wednesday morning, I'm getting ready for shift when Mom calls from the kitchen, voice shaking like autumn leaves. Marcus, there's a man in our backyard with a camera. I grabbed my service weapon and badge, expecting a burglar. Instead, I found some guy in a cheap suit crouched behind my air conditioning unit, telephoto lens aimed at my house like he was documenting a crime scene. The acrid smell of his cigarette smoke hung in the morning air like guilt. Private security, he explained when I confronted him, flashing credentials that looked legit enough. Hired to monitor suspicious activity at this address? Suspicious activity? Like what? Watering my lawn with criminal intent? The guy, Tommy, according to his ID, looked about as comfortable as a vegetarian at a barbecue convention. Look, detective, I know this is weird. Lady paid me to watch for criminal behavior patterns. I told her this was garbage, but she's paying double my usual rate. That's when I realized Brenda had escalated from amateur stalker to hiring professional surveillance. The bitter taste of violated privacy flooded my mouth as I processed what this meant. She was building a case, documenting everything, preparing for some bigger play. But here's where Brenda made her first major mistake. Tommy recognized me from the police academy guest lectures I'd given on financial fraud. Small world in law enforcement circles, and apparently even smaller world in private security willing to spy on cops. Man, I sat through your presentation on mortgage fraud patterns 3 years ago, Tommy said, stubbing out his cigarette. This whole thing feels wrong. That woman's been pushing me to find something, anything. Yesterday, she suggested I might discover drug paraphernalia if I looked hard enough. My blood turned to ice water. Planting evidence. That's serious felony territory, the kind that destroys careers and sends people to prison. I convinced Tommy to keep his recording equipment running during their next conversation, and sure enough, Brenda took the bait like a starving bass hitting a worm. I'm paying you to find problems. Her voice crackled through Tommy's wire the next day. Surely a police detective would have something worth discovering. Use your imagination, Mr. Crawford. That recording became Exhibit A in what I was starting to think of as the People versus Brenda Hutchfield. Meanwhile, the harassment campaign intensified like a Florida hurricane gaining strength. Brenda filed a formal complaint with my department claiming I'd threatened and intimidated her during our conversation about the violation notice. Internal Affairs called me in for an interview. Routine procedure, but still a black mark that could affect promotions and assignments. Detective Delacroix? The IA lieutenant said, sliding a folder across the table. We've received allegations about your conduct toward a civilian complainant. I handed over my documentation. Photos, timestamps, witness statements from Mrs. Eliana and Colonel Brennan. 15 years of police work teaches you to always have your story straight before someone tries to rewrite it with their version of events. The IA investigation cleared me in 48 hours, but the damage was done. Word spreads through law enforcement like wildfire in dry grass when someone files complaints against an officer. My captain pulled me aside with that look every cop dreads, part sympathy, part warning. Marcus, I know this is bullshit, but be extra careful. This woman's building a narrative, and she seems organized about it. That weekend, Zoe arrived for our regular visit, but something was different. She seemed withdrawn, picking at her food instead of diving into our traditional pizza and movie night. The smell of cooling pepperoni filled the silence between us like an unwelcome guest. Dad, some kids at school heard about the HOA stuff. They're asking if you're in trouble with the police. My heart cracked like a dropped coffee mug. Brenda's poison was spreading beyond our neighborhood, affecting my daughter's social life, her reputation at school. The metallic taste of pure rage filled my mouth. But kids are resilient, and Zoe had inherited her father's stubborn streak along with his brown eyes. I told them my dad catches the real bad guys, and some jealous woman is just being mean because she has nothing better to do. Then I asked if they wanted to see pictures of our Jeep restoration. That night, I dove deeper into background research on Brenda Hutchfield. Police databases revealed interesting details. Her husband, Kenneth, owed $47,000 in back taxes. Brenda's real estate license had been suspended for 3 months after an ethics violation involving undisclosed conflicts of interest. Financial pressure, professional problems, personal humiliation, classic recipe for someone looking to control whatever they could grab. I also discovered something that made my detective instincts sing like a tuning fork. 3 other families had moved out of our neighborhood in the past 2 years after disputes with the HOA. Similar patterns: harassment over vehicle storage, noise complaints, moral character questions. Always families with children, always ending in frustrated relocation. The pieces were clicking together like evidence in a complex fraud case. But I had a feeling Brenda's next move would make everything else look like amateur hour. Time to get ahead of whatever desperate play she was planning. Sunday morning, 6 a.m. Church bells echoing across the neighborhood, Mom making coffee that smelled like hope and normalcy, and Zoe excited about finishing the Jeep's sound system after service. Perfect family morning until I stepped outside barefoot and found my garage chain cut clean through, dangling like a steel accusation. My Jeep was gone. The metallic taste of pure fury flooded my mouth as I discovered the violation notice taped to my garage door. Unauthorized commercial vehicle constituting immediate safety hazard, removed per Emergency Authority Section 12.4. Vehicle subject to daily storage fees pending compliance hearing. Brenda had actually done it. She'd broken into my property and stolen my car while we slept. "Dad, what happened to the Jeep?" Zoe's voice cracked behind me, still in her church dress, excitement deflating like a punctured balloon. That's when something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was about a woman so drunk on petty power that she'd traumatize a 14-year-old girl to prove a point. The smell of fresh-cut metal from the chain filled my nostrils like evidence at a crime scene. I called 911 first, then my captain. "Sir, I need to report a breaking and entering with vehicle theft at my residence." The responding officer was Rodriguez from my precinct. He took one look at the cut chain, photographed everything, and whistled low. "Detective, this is textbook criminal trespassing and theft. Want me to arrest her now?" "Not yet. Let's build the case properly. But first, I needed my Jeep back." The towing notice listed Discount Eddie's Auto Recovery as the impound lot. When I arrived, Big Eddie Torino took one look at my badge and started apologizing faster than a teenager caught with beer. "Detective, that crazy lady told me you were some kind of criminal, that the vehicle was evidence in a drug case or something. But when I loaded it up, I noticed all the police modifications. The radio equipment, the hidden compartments, the surveillance gear. This is a cop car, ain't it?" I nodded, showing him my department ID. "Undercover unit." "What exactly did Mrs. Hutchfield tell you?" Eddie's face went pale as fresh concrete. "She said you were under investigation, that the HOA had authority to impound vehicles pending criminal charges. Man, she played me like a fiddle at a bluegrass festival. Said I'd get ongoing contracts for all HOA towing if I helped her out." There it was. The corruption angle my detective brain had been sniffing around. Brenda wasn't just harassing me. She was using HOA authority to direct business to preferred vendors in exchange for favors. I'd prosecuted similar schemes in municipal fraud cases, but never involving lawn care and flower bed disputes. "Eddie, I need you to document everything she told you. Times, dates, promises made. Can you do that?" "Absolutely." "Detective, I run a legitimate business. I don't want any part of whatever this woman's cooking." While Eddie prepared his statement, I did what any good detective does, followed the money trail. Back home, I requested 3 years of HOA financial records through legal channels. What I found made my fraud investigator instincts dance like kids on Christmas morning. Mrs. Eliana, bless her sharp accountant's eye, had been keeping unofficial records as a concerned neighbor. "Something not right with money," she told me over tea that tasted like justice brewing. "Too many payments to same companies, always round numbers, never competitive bids." The pattern was beautiful in its criminal simplicity. Brenda directed all HOA contracts, landscaping, snow removal, security, towing, to a network of friendly vendors who charged inflated rates and kicked back percentages to shell companies she controlled. 3 years of systematic embezzlement, hidden behind legitimate-looking invoices that wouldn't fool a first-year accounting student. $31,000 stolen from neighborhood improvement funds. Money meant for playground equipment, street repairs, community events, all funneled into Brenda's secret accounts to cover Kenneth's tax debt and her mother's nursing home bills. But here's what made this personal. She'd been using harassment campaigns to drive away residents who asked too many questions about finances. 3 families in 2 years, all forced out after questioning HOA expenditures. all families with children who might have benefited from those stolen community funds. Colonel Brennan confirmed my suspicions when he mentioned the previous residents. Nice families, Detective. Asked reasonable questions about where their dues were going. Next thing you know, violation notices flying like confetti. Complaints about everything from mailbox colors to dog barking. They gave up and moved rather than fight. That evening, Zoe asked the question that crystallized everything. Dad, why does she hate us so much? She doesn't hate us, sweetheart. She's scared. Scared people do desperate things to protect secrets. What kind of secrets? I looked at my daughter, smart, brave, asking the right questions like a natural detective, and realized this wasn't just about protecting my family anymore. This was about protecting every family in our neighborhood from a woman who'd turned community leadership into personal profit. The kind that land people in federal prison, kiddo. Monday morning brought Tommy's call with more recorded evidence. Brenda attempting to bribe a city councilman, Brenda offering additional payment for discovering drug evidence, each recording another felony charge. Time to set a trap and watch desperation become her downfall. Tuesday morning, Mrs. Eliana knocked on my door carrying a manila folder thick enough to stop bullets. Her usually cheerful face wore the expression of someone who'd discovered a body in their garden shed. Detective Marcus, I stay up all night looking at numbers. Very bad things happening with our money. She spread HOA financial documents across my kitchen table like a coroner laying out evidence. The smell of her jasmine tea mixed with the musty scent of damning paperwork, while morning sunlight illuminated 3 years of systematic theft. Look here, she pointed with a pencil worn down to a nub. Snow removal, February 2022. We pay $4,800 for plowing, but February 2022, no snow in Florida. I remember because my arthritis feel good that month. My fraud investigation training kicked into overdrive as I examined the invoice. Sunshine Landscape Solutions. Billing for emergency winter weather response services in a state where snow is rarer than unicorns with tax problems. Mrs. Eliana, you're a genius. This is exactly what we need. Over the next 4 hours, we documented a masterpiece of suburban corruption that would make organized crime bosses weep with envy. Brenda had created an entire ecosystem of fake vendors and inflated contracts. All-season security services charged $2,400 monthly for nighttime patrols that existed only in her imagination. Premium Pool Maintenance LLC billed for cleaning a community pool that was about as real as Bigfoot's swimming lessons. Each company traced back to shell accounts controlled by Brenda through a web of LLCs and false identities that would impress money launderers. The woman had turned HOA management into a criminal enterprise, complete with more layers than a wedding cake made of felonies. Colonel Brennan arrived around noon with his own folder, military precision evident in his organized evidence collection. Detective, I ran those vendor names through business registrations. Half don't exist, and the other half are registered to addresses that would make Santa Claus suspicious. He'd gone old school, driving to the listed business locations like a one-man fraud investigation unit. Sunshine Landscape Solutions was supposedly operated from a vacant lot behind a gas station. All-season security listed an address that turned out to be a Wendy's restaurant. The manager at Wendy's thought I was having a senior moment when I asked about security services. Brennan chuckled, his weathered face creasing into a grin. Though he did offer me a military discount on a Baconator. The taste of justice was getting sweeter by the hour as we compiled evidence that could send Brenda away for longer than most sitcom runs. Total theft, $47,000 over 3 years, stolen through 127 fraudulent transactions with the creativity of a con artist and the subtlety of a carnival barker. But the smoking gun came from Tommy's surveillance equipment. Brenda had been sloppier with digital security than a teenager sexting. She'd made fake invoices on her home computer and emailed them from her personal account, leaving digital fingerprints all over everything. She created these invoices at 2 a.m. on Sunday mornings, Tommy explained, showing me the metadata timestamps. Always after HOA meetings where someone questioned expenses. Classic pattern of reactive evidence creation. Mrs. Eliana nodded with the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough corruption to fill a textbook. In old country, we have saying, thief always counts stolen money at midnight. The money trail told a story of desperation escalating like a Florida hurricane gaining strength. Small amounts initially, a few hundred here and there. But as Kenneth's tax debt mounted and her mother's care costs increased, Brenda's theft became bolder, more frequent, more desperate. 3 families had questioned these expenses over the years. 3 families had been harassed into leaving. The pattern was clearer than HD television. Brenda used her HOA position to silence anyone who might expose her crimes. This is why she targeted you, Colonel Brennan observed. Detective with financial crimes experience living next door, you were her worst nightmare with a badge. But cornered criminals don't surrender quietly. They bite back with everything they have. Time to prepare for her final, desperate counterattack. My garage had been transformed into something that would make FBI task forces jealous if FBI agents operated out of spaces that still smelled like motor oil and teenage dreams. Evidence boards covered every wall, red string connecting financial documents like a spider web of corruption. The aroma of Mrs. Eliana's jasmine tea mixed with Colonel Brennan's black coffee created an oddly comforting scent of justice brewing. Mrs. Eliana sat at my workbench, calculator clicking like machine gun fire as she cross-referenced bank statements with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Colonel Brennan stood at attention beside a timeline he'd created with military precision, marking every fraudulent transaction like battle positions. Tommy lounged in the corner, headphones on, transcribing recorded conversations that would make federal prosecutors weep tears of joy. "All right, team," I said, feeling like the world's most suburban general commanding an army of retirees and part-time investigators. "We've got enough evidence to bury Brenda deeper than a time capsule, but we need to do this right. One procedural mistake and she walks on a technicality." Zoe peeked into the garage, eyes wide at our makeshift command center. "Dad, this looks like one of those crime shows Mom watches. Are you going to arrest the bad lady?" "Eventually, sweetheart. But first we have to make sure the case is bulletproof." The legal strategy was three-pronged, like a trident aimed at the heart of suburban corruption. First, criminal charges through the district attorney's office: embezzlement, fraud, conspiracy. Second, federal referral for mail fraud and tax evasion, because Brenda had been foolish enough to use postal services for her fake invoices. Third, civil lawsuit for recovery of stolen funds plus triple damages. Here's what 15 years of financial crimes investigation taught me. Building a fraud case is like constructing a house of cards in a hurricane. Every piece of evidence has to support every other piece, and one weak link brings down the entire prosecution. Chain of custody, witness credibility, document authentication, all have to be perfect. "Detective," Mrs. Eliana said, looking up from her calculations, "I find something very interesting. The amounts she steal, they match exactly with Kenneth's tax payment schedule. She not stealing for luxury shopping, she stealing to save marriage from IRS? That psychological insight was worth its weight in prosecutorial gold. Juries love clear motives, and desperate woman trying to save failing marriage plays infinitely better than greedy neighbor steals flower fund money." Colonel Brennan had mapped out Brenda's network of corruption like he was planning to invade a small country. "She's got 5 shell companies, 12 fake vendor accounts, and one very nervous husband who's about to discover his wife committed federal crimes to pay his tax debt." Tommy pulled off his headphones with a grin that could power a small city. "Guys, you're gonna love this latest recording. I got her on tape trying to bribe Councilman Martinez to revoke Marcus's residential permits. She offered him $5,000 cash and promised his landscaping company would get all future HOA contracts. The beautiful irony made my detective heart sing like a perfectly tuned engine. Councilman Martinez was one of the few genuinely honest politicians in local government, rarer than albino alligators in Florida politics. He'd not only refused the bribe, but immediately reported it to the FBI. Brenda's attempt at corruption had triggered a federal investigation that would make our local case look like the opening act for a major concert. "Federal agents want to coordinate with our evidence collection," I explained to the team. "This isn't just about recovering HOA funds anymore. This is about dismantling a municipal corruption network that probably extends beyond our little neighborhood." We spent the next hour planning evidence preservation, like we were handling plutonium. Every document photographed and cataloged, every recording backed up to multiple secure locations, every witness statement notarized and dated with obsessive attention to detail. Defense attorneys might be sharks, but they can't bite through properly documented evidence that follows every rule in the book. Dave and Sierra, the young couple who'd initially been intimidated into supporting Brenda, had transformed into unlikely allies with the fury of the converted. "She threatened our home business permit," Sierra explained, her voice shaking with newfound courage. "Said one word from her and the city would find violations that would shut us down permanently. That was witness intimidation, another felony to add to Brenda's growing collection of federal charges. The community mobilization was beautiful to watch. like seeing people emerge from bomb shelters after an all-clear signal. Neighbors who'd been afraid to speak up were now lining up to provide statements. Mrs. Patterson revealed Brenda had pressured her to file false noise complaints about children playing. Mr. Rodriguez admitted he'd been blackmailed into signing that petition after Brenda discovered his undocumented nephew was living with him. "It's like watching people come out of hiding after a dictator falls," Colonel Brennan observed, his military experience providing perspective on community liberation movements. But experience taught me that cornered criminals become unpredictably dangerous. Brenda still had access to HOA funds, still had her network of intimidated supporters, still had the desperate fury of someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. "She's going to make one last play," I warned the team as we wrapped up our evening planning session. "Something big, something desperate. We need to be ready for anything." The taste of approaching victory was sweeter than my morning coffee, but I'd learned to stay vigilant until the handcuffs clicked shut. Wednesday morning, I woke up to the acrid smell of botanical genocide. Not metaphorical death, actual plant massacre. My entire front yard looked like it had been carpet-bombed by the Grim Reaper's landscaping crew. Every blade of grass, every flower Mom had carefully planted, every shrub Zoe and I had selected together, all withered to brown skeletal remains that crunched underfoot like broken dreams. "Marcus!" Mom's voice cracked from the front porch, her walker clicking against concrete like a drumbeat of outrage. "Someone poisoned our garden." The herbicide had been applied with surgical precision during the night, creating a property line of death that would make border guards jealous. My yard looked like a crime scene outlined in dead vegetation, while Brenda's lawn across the street gleamed like it was maintained by obsessive-compulsive elves working overtime. I was photographing the damage when my phone rang. Child Protective Services. My heart dropped faster than a lead balloon in a gravity contest. "Detective Delacroix, this is Sandra Williams from CPS. We've received a complaint about unsafe living conditions for a minor at your residence. I need to schedule an immediate home inspection." My blood turned to ice water. What kind of complaint? Anonymous tip claiming drug paraphernalia, unsecured weapons, and an unstable guardian exhibiting paranoid behavior. The metallic taste of pure fury flooded my mouth like I'd been chewing on copper pennies. Brenda had escalated from property crime to attacking my fitness as a father. She was trying to take my daughter away. "Ma'am, I'm a police detective. My weapons are properly secured. I don't use drugs. And the only paranoid behavior in this neighborhood is coming from my HOA president, who apparently thinks she's running her own personal police state." "I understand, detective, but we have to investigate every complaint. Can you be available this afternoon?" After hanging up, I called my ex-wife, Sarah. This conversation was going to hurt worse than dental surgery performed by a vengeful dentist with trembling hands. "Marcus, what the hell is going on? CPS called me asking about Zoe's living conditions. They mentioned drug concerns and psychological instability." "It's the HOA president, Sarah. She's filing false reports to harass me. CPS will find nothing because there's nothing to find except maybe an unhealthy obsession with justice and an overabundance of police procedural knowledge. Maybe Zoe should stay with me until this gets resolved." Those words hit like a sledgehammer to the chest, followed by a steamroller for good measure. Brenda wasn't just attacking my property or reputation. She was trying to destroy my relationship with my daughter. The CPS inspection that afternoon was humiliating but thorough. Sandra Williams was professional, apologetic, and clearly recognized a bogus complaint when she saw one. My service weapons were properly locked, the house was cleaner than a surgical suite, and Mom testified to my excellent character as a father and caregiver. "Detective, this complaint appears to be completely unfounded," Williams concluded. "However, I have to document everything. False CPS reports are criminal offenses, and this feels very much like targeted harassment." That evening brought news that made my detective brain sing like a perfectly tuned engine. City Councilman Martinez called with an update that was better than winning the lottery. "Detective, I need to warn you about something beautiful. That HOA president of yours approached me again today, this time with cash in hand. $10,000 to revoke your residential permits and force you to relocate. Please tell me you recorded it." "Better, I was wearing an FBI wire. Federal agents are very interested in municipal corruption cases, especially ones involving attempted bribery of elected officials by suburban dictators with clipboards." The irony was so beautiful it brought tears to my eyes. Brenda's desperation was digging her legal grave deeper with every illegal move, like watching someone use dynamite to get out of quicksand. But the psychological warfare was taking its toll on my family. Mom's blood pressure spiked so high her doctor threatened hospitalization. She'd started hiding in the house whenever she heard Brenda's voice outside, like a combat veteran avoiding fireworks on the 4th of July. "Marcus, maybe we should move," she whispered over dinner, her hands shaking as she cut her food. "This stress is not good for my diabetes." That night, I installed motion-activated security cameras around the entire property. If Brenda wanted to play dirty tricks, she'd do it in high definition for the prosecution team to enjoy with popcorn. Tommy called with more recordings that were like Christmas presents wrapped in federal charges. Brenda had been calling other neighborhood residents, offering them money to file complaints against me. Witness tampering, conspiracy to file false police reports, obstruction of justice. The woman was single-handedly creating a federal prosecutor's retirement fund. "She's completely unhinged," Tommy reported, calling people at all hours, threatening them if they don't support her, promising them favors if they do. It's like watching someone have a nervous breakdown in real time, except with more felonies. Friday morning brought the breaking point. Zoe arrived for her weekend visit, took one look at our poisoned yard, and burst into tears that could break hearts in 3 counties. "Dad, I hate her. She's trying to ruin everything we built together." Watching my daughter cry over our destroyed garden transformed me from detective building a case into father protecting his family. The smell of dead plants mixed with my daughter's tears created a memory that would fuel my determination forever. Justice was coming, and it was bringing handcuffs. Monday morning brought panic in Brenda's voice that was more beautiful than a symphony orchestra hitting perfect pitch. Tommy's surveillance equipment picked up frantic phone calls starting at 5 a.m., her desperation crackling through the recordings like static electricity before a Florida thunderstorm. "I need to get out of town for a while," she told someone who sounded suspiciously like her sister in Nevada. "There are some legal complications here that require geographic distance." By Tuesday, the moving truck appeared in her driveway like a white flag of surrender being run up a flagpole made of pure panic. But this wasn't retreat. This was evidence destruction on an industrial scale that would make document shredding companies jealous. I watched through binoculars as Brenda loaded boxes of documents, her home computer, and what looked suspiciously like HOA financial records into her personal vehicle. "She's running," I told Colonel Brennan as we observed from my kitchen window. Classic flight behavior when suspects realize the walls are closing in faster than a Florida sinkhole. Mom brought us coffee that smelled like victory brewing while we documented Brenda's increasingly erratic behavior. "In old country," she said with the wisdom of someone who'd seen enough drama to fill a library, "we say, guilty dog always runs first when dinner bell rings." But Brenda had underestimated federal law enforcement's ability to track fleeing suspects. Agent Patricia Hernandez from the FBI's white-collar crime division called Wednesday morning with news that made my day brighter than a lighthouse in a power outage. "Detective Delacroix, we've placed travel restrictions on Mrs. Hutchfield pending our bribery investigation. She won't be leaving the county anytime soon unless she plans to swim to Cuba." The beautiful irony was that Brenda's attempt to flee had triggered automatic federal protocols for flight risk determination. Her desperate gambit to escape consequences had actually accelerated the federal case against her, like hitting the turbo button on her own destruction. That evening, Tommy called with recordings that were like finding the Holy Grail in your garage sale. Brenda had been making increasingly frantic calls to her network of corrupt vendors, trying to coordinate story alignment and evidence disposal with all the subtlety of a circus parade. She called Big Eddie and told him to lose any records of their conversations, Tommy reported, his voice barely containing excitement. Then she called that fake landscaping company and told them to shut down operations immediately and forget we ever existed. But here's where Brenda's panic led to her biggest mistake, one that would make criminal justice professors use her case as a textbook example of how not to evade federal prosecution. In her desperation to cover tracks, she'd called her sister in Nevada and asked her to hold some important documents until this whole nightmare blows over. Her sister, apparently possessing more common sense than Brenda had ever demonstrated, had recorded the conversation and immediately called the FBI. Turns out Brenda had a history of involving family members in questionable schemes, and her sister was tired of being an unwilling accomplice to financial crimes. "She wants me to hide evidence in a federal investigation," the sister told Agent Hernandez. "I'm done enabling her criminal behavior. Besides, she stole my credit cards last time she visited and bought herself a spa weekend while I was working double shifts." That credit card theft triggered interstate fraud charges, transforming Brenda's local embezzlement case into a multi-state federal investigation. The woman couldn't stop committing crimes even when trying to escape consequences for previous crimes, like a criminal version of potato chips, she couldn't commit just one. Thursday brought the emergency HOA meeting that would become neighborhood legend, talked about for years like residents discussing where they were when Kennedy was shot. People packed the community center like it was a heavyweight championship fight, which in many ways it was. The smell of stale coffee mixed with the electric tension of a community ready for justice. Mrs. Eliana had prepared a financial presentation that would make forensic accountants weep tears of professional admiration. Charts, graphs, timeline analyses, all documenting 3 years of systematic theft with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker having a really good day. In conclusion, she announced to the standing room only crowd, Brenda Hutchfield has stolen $47,000 from our community fund through 127 fraudulent transactions. Money meant for playground equipment, street repairs, and community improvements, all taken to pay her personal debts and maintain her lifestyle. The vote of no confidence was unanimous except for 3 abstentions from Brenda's remaining supporters, who looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs and possibly into another dimension entirely. But Brenda wasn't finished. Friday morning brought her most desperate gambit yet, a bonfire in her backyard that could be seen from the International Space Station. The acrid smell of burning paper filled the neighborhood air as she destroyed what remained of HOA records, personal documents, and anything else that might connect her to 3 years of criminal activity. What she didn't know was that among those documents was a 17-page handwritten confession she'd prepared but never sent, a paranoid rambling about unfair persecution, mixed with detailed admissions of every crime she'd committed. The FBI's cyber crimes unit recovered it from her partially melted hard drive. Sometimes criminals are their own worst enemies. The community center had never seen anything like it. By 7 p.m., every seat was filled. People stood along the walls like witnesses to history, and the overflow crowd spilled into the parking lot where speakers had been hastily set up. The smell of nervous sweat mixed with anticipation hung in the air thicker than Florida humidity in August. Local news vans lined the street like a media invasion, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like technological prayers for good footage. Channel 7's investigative reporter had been following the story for weeks, and tonight felt like the finale of the most watched neighborhood drama in county history. I sat in the front row with my evidence folders, feeling like David preparing to face Goliath, except my slingshot was loaded with financial documents and federal charges. Mom sat beside me, her walker decorated with a small American flag that Colonel Brennan had attached. Apparently taking down corrupt officials deserved patriotic accessories. Zoe squeezed my hand as FBI agent Hernandez took the podium. Dad, are you nervous? A little, but sometimes doing the right thing feels scary before it feels good. Agent Hernandez's voice cut through the crowd chatter like a sword through silk. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you'll hear evidence of systematic fraud, embezzlement, and corruption that has stolen from your community for 3 years. The PowerPoint presentation began with financial charts that made the audience gasp audibly. Mrs. Eliana had outdone herself. Every fraudulent transaction highlighted in red, every fake vendor exposed, every stolen dollar accounted for with the precision of a Swiss bank audit. $47,000 stolen through 127 separate fraudulent transactions, Agent Hernandez announced. Money intended for community improvements, stolen to pay personal debts, and maintain a lifestyle built on lies. Then came the recordings. Tommy's surveillance equipment had captured everything. Brenda attempting to bribe officials, offering kickbacks to vendors, threatening residents who questioned her authority. Her voice filled the community center, each word another nail in the coffin of her credibility. "I'm paying you to find problems," her recorded voice crackled through the speakers. Surely a police detective would have something worth discovering. Use your imagination. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, angry murmurs, and the sound of people finally understanding how deep the corruption ran. Mrs. Patterson stood up, her voice shaking with years of suppressed fury. She threatened to report my grandchildren for excessive noise if I didn't sign her petition against Detective Delacroix, made me choose between supporting a good man and protecting my family from harassment. That opened the floodgates. Resident after resident stood to share their stories. Intimidation, threats, financial manipulation, harassment campaigns against anyone who questioned Brenda's authority. The community center became a confession booth for victims of suburban tyranny. Then Brenda arrived. She walked through the back doors flanked by her criminal defense attorney, looking like she was attending her own funeral. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, but instead of reverence, the silence carried the weight of collective judgment. Her lawyer approached the microphone with the confidence of someone billing by the hour. My client has been the victim of a coordinated harassment campaign by a disgruntled resident with a personal vendetta. I stood up, my detective training overriding any nervousness. Your Honor, Agent Hernandez, may I present additional evidence? The final recording played, Brenda's own voice, captured by her sister's phone, detailing her crimes with the thoroughness of someone confessing to a priest. 17 minutes of admissions, justifications, and detailed descriptions of every fraudulent scheme she'd orchestrated. I had to protect the community from undesirable elements, her recorded voice explained. If that meant redirecting some funds to cover legitimate expenses, well, sometimes leadership requires difficult decisions. The community center erupted. Shouts of anger, demands for justice, and calls for immediate arrest filled the air like a rebellion brewing in real time. Brenda's face went pale as fresh concrete as she realized her own words were destroying any hope of defense. Agent Hernandez raised her hand for silence. Mrs. Brenda Hutchfield, you are under arrest for federal charges of mail fraud, conspiracy to commit bribery, embezzlement of community funds, and interstate flight to avoid prosecution. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the community center speakers, amplified for everyone to hear. Justice literally had its own soundtrack, but I wasn't done. I approached the microphone with 15 years of courtroom experience and a father's fury finally unleashed. For 3 years, this woman stole from your children's playground fund. She harassed families into leaving their homes. She filed false police reports, attempted to bribe elected officials, and turned community leadership into a criminal enterprise. But here's what she didn't count on. I paused, looking directly at Brenda as the cameras captured every moment. She didn't count on moving next door to a detective who specializes in financial crimes. Every fraudulent invoice, every fake vendor, every stolen dollar, all documented, all admissible in court, all gift-wrapped for federal prosecutors. The standing ovation lasted 6 minutes. Flash cameras captured Brenda's perp walk as she was led away in handcuffs, her corruption empire crumbling like a house of cards in a hurricane. Outside, Zoe hugged me tight as news reporters captured our reunion. Dad, you did it. You caught the bad guy. We did it, sweetheart. Our whole community did it together. The taste of justice was sweeter than I'd ever imagined. 6 months later, the mailbox that once held violation notices now overflowed with thank you cards from neighbors, invitations to block parties, and college acceptance letters for scholarship recipients. The morning air smelled like fresh coffee and blooming jasmine instead of herbicide and institutional fear. Brenda pleaded guilty to avoid a federal trial that would have lasted longer than most soap opera story arcs. 5 years in federal prison, $73,000 in restitution, and permanent revocation of her real estate license. Her corruption empire dismantled faster than a house of cards in a Florida hurricane. The HOA transformation was miraculous to witness. Mrs. Eliana became treasurer, bringing decades of bookkeeping experience and zero tolerance for financial shenanigans that would make accountants weep with joy. Colonel Brennan served as interim president until fair elections could be held, establishing term limits and rotating leadership that would make the founding fathers high-five in their graves. No more dictatorships, he announced at our first reformed HOA meeting. This is America. We believe in checks, balances, and the constitutional right to park reasonable vehicles in our own driveways without persecution. The recovered funds created something beautiful, the Maplewood Heights Community Scholarship Program. Every year, 3 local high school students receive full college funding from money Brenda had stolen from playground equipment budgets. Poetic justice at its finest. Her greed now pays for education that will produce the next generation of fraud investigators. Dave and Sierra launched the Neighborhood Business Network, connecting local entrepreneurs without fear of clipboard retaliation. Mr. Rodriguez's nephew received legal status assistance through community connections. Mrs. Patterson's grandchildren play freely without noise complaint terrorism. The neighborhood flourished like a garden after removing toxic weeds. My family healed in ways that surprised even me. Mom's blood pressure stabilized once the stress evaporated, and she became the unofficial neighborhood grandmother, baking cookies for anyone who looked lonely enough to need carbohydrate therapy. The wheelchair ramp I'd installed became command central, where she held court, dispensing wisdom and homemade brownies in equal measure. Zoe visits every weekend again, our Jeep restoration project now legendary among neighborhood kids who think having a detective dad is cooler than owning a rocket ship. We'd added a sound system that could wake hibernating bears and custom paint that sparkled like justice in the Florida sunshine. "Dad, I want to catch financial criminals like you do," she announced while installing new speakers. "But maybe I'll specialize in HOA corruption cases. Apparently there's job security in crazy neighbors." My ex-wife Sarah actually apologized, a conversation that tasted sweeter than victory cake with extra frosting. "Marcus, I saw the news coverage. I'm sorry I doubted you. You protected our daughter and your community with real courage." Professional recognition followed like dominoes falling in perfect sequence. The department promoted me to detective sergeant, and I now speak at police academies about community policing and financial fraud investigation. My case study appears in law enforcement textbooks under suburban corruption, when neighbors attack with clipboards. Kenneth, Brenda's ex-husband, married his dental hygienist and moved to Georgia faster than someone fleeing a zombie apocalypse. He sends Christmas cards thanking the neighborhood for liberation from criminal association. Even dentists have standards about enabling corruption. The annual Community Unity Festival now draws thousands of visitors, featuring local businesses, live music, and the infamous Corruption Memorial Garden, planted where Brenda's herbicide once killed everything. Flowers bloom there now, a living testament that beauty can grow from the ashes of ugly behavior. 1 year later, our neighborhood leads the county in property values, community engagement, and successful HOA management. Crime dropped 67% after establishing proper leadership and eliminating the source of constant conflict. Amazing how communities thrive when they're not under attack from within. Tommy started his own private investigation business specializing in HOA corruption cases. Apparently, there's a nationwide epidemic of power-hungry clipboard warriors, he laughed during our anniversary barbecue. "Thanks to your case study, I'm booked through next decade." Mrs. Eliana jokes about writing the HOA Corruption Handbook, a suburban detective's guide to financial justice. But she's too busy managing transparent, accountable community funds, where every expense is published monthly and every decision made in sunlight. This morning, waking up in my own home, surrounded by neighbors who've become family, breathing air that smells like freedom instead of fear, that's when I know justice isn't just about punishment. It's about healing communities and protecting families from those who abuse trust. Speaking of HOA nightmares, what's your worst neighbor power trip story? Drop it in the comments below. And if this story helped you understand your rights against community corruption, smash that subscribe button for Karen's stories, because we've got more justice-served content coming your way. Remember, bullies win when good people stay silent, but communities win when good people stand together. Document everything, know your rights, and never let clipboard tyrants steal your peace.